Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I need to get underway. The schedule is fairly tight, and because I'm noted for talking too much anyway, those of you who know me are smiling away because you know that it'll be stopping me. So I've got various people at the back of the room who've promised to signal me at 5 minutes before I'm due to stop. So welcome here, and I hope that what I've got to share with you will in fact be something that you'll be able to take back to school, back to your various positions wherever you come from in education, and cause you to reflect on what this session is about. I make no apology for the fact that this is actually what education is about. You could actually be deceived out there that education is about everything except children. I'm actually interested in children, how children learn, what actually happens in that learning process, and what it is we know from the past that is actually going to inform how we engage in education in the years ahead. In the audience there are a number of young teachers, and I wonder on their behalf what they must be making of the current dilemma that the government has clearly got about what primary education is about. I think there's a watershed in education at the moment, and if you think back to where we were 5 years ago, when we had Alexander pontificating from Cambridge, we had Rose pontificating from London, and a whole range of promises as to what the horizon might be in the future. A new political party arrived which promised by now to have presented what the primary forum of education would be like in the next 10 years. And it's quite surprising, isn't it, that there's a distinct absence of any idea at all except to measure children. It seems that measuring children is all we're interested in doing. I'm actually interested in the educational context, and to quote a number of references to you which will allow us to put these children into context. The wisest writers devote themselves to what a man ought to know without asking what a child is capable of learning. They're always looking for the man in the child without considering what he is before he becomes a man. Rousseau, writing about what education is really about. We've lost sight of it. And yet, here is a historical statement that is as relevant, in fact it's more relevant at this very moment. I wish Mr. Gove was sitting here with you. I really do. And of course, to take other historical examples to illustrate the point I want to make, when Michelangelo went to see the Pope prior to being employed to build the great dome of St. Peter's and paint the Sistine Chapel, he took with him a reference. And that reference said, "The bearer of these presents is Michelangelo the sculptor. His nature is such that he requires to be drawn out by kindness and encouragement, but if love be shown him, and he be treated really well, he may accomplish things that will make the whole world wonder." Have we lost sight of awe and wonder in childhood? Have we forgotten about the arrangements that we are so capable of making, of bringing things into classrooms, of taking children out of classrooms in order to understand and come to terms with the world around them? My fundamental belief today, tomorrow, throughout the whole of my life has been that the experiences that you have shape you to be the person you become. And if you here today represent key players in primary education in this country, or in secondary education in this country, or other aspects of education, you must know and realise how critically important it is that how the classroom, the space that we call the learning room, is going to be. So let's consider then where this may take us. Can experiences of the past illuminate the curriculum of the future? Give a child a fish and you feed him for a day. Give a child a rod and a line and teach him how to fish, and you feed him for life. We've got caught up in something which is a pretend education. You cannot have avoided the fact that our new Chief Inspector of Schools today is once again haranguing British education for a drop in standards in reading. Why didn't he stand up and say, what is it that's going to cause the children of this country to want to read? To have a desire to devour books daily? That the arrangements that teachers make in those learning rooms is going to cause children to want to pick up books, to want to turn the pages, to want to investigate and find out about words and language. Why? Do we really need to keep telling the teaching profession of this country that they're no good? That standards are slipping? That they're not? They're not slipping. It's a fallacy. It's a political game that is being played with the teaching profession of this country. And so consequently, lifelong learning is the norm that is augmenting and in some cases displacing school-age education. That child balancing represents something that education is about daily. Walking the tightrope. And what do? We actually hold the hand of that child daily. It isn't something we deliver on Monday and leave on Tuesday and Wednesday. The best schools in this country, and there are hundreds of them, are actually making arrangements for that kind of learning to take place. The schoolroom of the future is neither school nor room. It's a learning room. And what we need to do is to use all the expertise that has gone on and around us in the last 10 to 15 years and beyond that, but the expertise that is around, that has talked about what we understand about the brain and how the child develops, in order that that learning room is a place of excitement, a place of pedagogy, a place of research, a place of rest, a place of understanding. So, reinventing the best ways we know about how children learn means that what we do is we order the process, we arrange it, but we arrange it in such a way that there are enormous freedoms within it for the child to discover for themselves. It's never going to be going back to the good old days of early education where children were put in a room and find out. It isn't like that. It isn't a free-for-all, but at the same time we are not part of what the Victorian education system was, of sitting as you are. Look, in serried ranks. How would I prefer to have you in a different arrangement? If I could have organised the conference today to be in a different arrangement of an arena, you wouldn't be sitting in serried ranks. We would be moving around and discussing and taking time over it, but because this is the most convenient model for 45 minutes of presentation, you're sitting down and you're in a passive role. In actual fact, we're now about 8 minutes in, so a lot of you have already lost concentration. What was it about the literacy hour? Do you remember, some of you sitting here have ever been part of the literacy hour, where there was an expectation that children could sit in a sedentary posture, as you are, for an hour, followed of course by another hour of mathematics, by which time you're bored out of your minds, because learning is active. Learning is getting things out and putting things away, knowing the place of things. In the learning room, going to get, finding. And of course, we, as experts with young children, know how to make the arrangements for where those things are. Fundamental shifts in thinking then, from a machine-based clockwork conception of the universe to a living organic system. I'm looking for a way of removing that regimentation, that standing in line, that marching to an order, to something where the child takes responsibility. And what we know is that the brain is a living, adjusting neural network. Learning is a natural activity, and guess what? It's messy. It doesn't fit into neat boxes. Teachers who work with young children are such exceptional people. To use the words of a very, very well-known educator, they're very good at presiding over chaos. It doesn't ever fit neatly. How do you do it? Daily. They don't come in neat packages. Do you really, really want all 8-year-olds in a room all to be identical? Be lucky to find 2 children who are twins in the same room, identical. And there's people shaking their heads because you know that even twins of the same age are not. So we have this amazing potential. Knowing what we know about human systems, human learning and the brain itself, we simply can no longer do what we do now. So, what are the unique learning potentials of a school? So I'm going to suggest that we go back, we go into the context that some of you, hopefully, may not have come from. Some of you have come from. Self-contained, isolated, frequently unconnected. I can remember quite distinctly in my first school in Birmingham that I had responsibility for, the classroom doors had been designed by architects and they had portholes. The idea of the porthole was that if you were going out of the door, you'd be able to see whether there was someone on the other side, and if you were coming in equally. I noticed within the first few weeks of being in my school, my new appointment, that the teachers had cleverly designed coat pegs on the inside of the doors so anybody walking down the corridor could not see into the rooms. They liked being isolated. And when I initiated discussions in staff meetings to inquire whether we could do something about it, I got a very, very negative response. So the caretaker and I, at half-term, removed all the classroom doors. We began the revolution of opening up education to allow children and teachers to begin to move around the spaces of education, to take responsibility for the opportunities. What do you hear? You hear what's happening here, don't you? Monologue. How far is it possible to develop the idea that the conversations that are taking place between the teacher and the child and the child, are of equal value and sometimes of more value? What do you feel? Constrained? frequently as I sit with children, as I do on a regular basis in classrooms, watching and listening, I realise that the classroom is a constrained space. That's why I want to rename it. I want to call it a learning room, where the child is taking huge responsibilities for their relationship with other people, for the resources that are in that space, and for the movements that take place in it. I recently met a little boy at the end of a working day in a primary school in Cheshire who was in tears. As his teacher collected him to find out why, he was crying about his coat. His coat had fallen off the coat peg in the corridor outside the boys' toilet. And as the boys had trod the path in and out of the toilet during the day, his coat had become some sort of doormat. Can you imagine? Can you imagine walking over somebody's coat because you don't care? I'm thinking of classrooms where children take responsibility for, places where children, and I have a quotation to give you. I remember the child, and I can tell you her name, I know how old she was. I spent 3 days in her classroom reorganising and reshaping that room to become a learning environment. Her name was Ellen Ferraby. She went home at the end of the first day and wrote a note to me which she brought to school the following day. And she said, "I think you'd like this, Mr. Cole, because I've thought about what we did yesterday. And if Ellen Ferraby had had £1 for every teacher in the world I've told this to, she'd be a multi-millionairess, and she deserves to be." We always put the things we use back, ready for the next person to choose. Do you? Is that part of the culture of the learning room that you work in? That your school develops from the very... yesterday I was working with teachers who are working with the very youngest children in our schools. And we were looking at the potential of what a very, very young nursery child can do. Guess what? One of the things that came out of the discussion was we discovered that children in nursery education can manage to go to the toilet on their own. Some can even come to school doing it, but certainly children in the nursery, in a number of instances, they were able to say that their children can do it. By the time those same children are in year 6, many of them are having to put their hand up to ask to go to the toilet. Does that sound like progress? Don't you think that if you can manage yourself at 4 and 5, that you should be being encouraged in these learning environments to set off and go to libraries, to walk corridors, to go to different parts of your learning environment with responsibility? And by giving more responsibility, so you get more responsibility back. I call him Yellow Hat. He is, in fact, in this particular costume, wearing the costume that he wore in a major role in a Shakespeare production that this class put on, which they spent a term working on. They didn't just work on it when it was the literacy hour, they worked on it all day, every day. All day, every day. To understand how in fact a play came into being. And you'll see later, amongst some of the other images that there are, how that develops. The mental model that is rigid and isolated and unconnected is not today's model. Learning structures, I'm afraid, are stifling the needs of children who have a need daily for sense making. I don't need to read the rest of it to you. It is there so clearly as part of our understanding of what in fact is happening. 19th century schools that base accountability on form and structure rather than learning cannot possibly create 21st century learners. You only have to look at what young children can do with computers, with mobile phones, to realise that in fact there is a whole framework out there of possibilities that we haven't tapped into. Restricted and tightly controlled structures discourage the very behaviours that we seek. The understanding, of course, possesses nothing that it's not first derived from the senses. Surely then the beginning of wisdom should consist not in the mere learning the names of things, but in the actual perception of the things themselves. Man's senses must be early brought to bear on the world that surrounds him, since throughout his whole life he has much to learn, to experience, and to accomplish. They sound noble words. They were said by Comenius. Are the children that you are working with, that you have responsibility for, daily engaged in coming to terms with the immediate world around them? Or have you fallen into the trap of studying distant lands, but you don't actually know the tree outside the classroom window? I am meeting children daily who have fallen into that trap because the teachers who they are working with have not understood the nature of the development of childhood. It begins in your own backyard. She's a young teacher. They're working on World War II. She's not given out a list of dates and times. She's actually a nurse in World War II. She's telling them of the terrible things that have happened in her experiences. Is schooling then to be endured as a rite of passage, or is it something where the daily experiences given to the children by you, set up by you, arranged by you, ordered by you, and the tools and equipment that underpin it, is that something that we progressively and developmentally understand, or is it something that has now become something that is left to chance? Why do we make schools so antiseptically rational? Let me ask you a question, and it could be the question of today for everybody. Do you know a school that makes you long for childhood? It's the one you work in. And if you're a young teacher sitting here wondering about the future of education, let me tell you that my investment, if I had millions and millions and millions of pounds, would be in the young teachers of today, to turn them into the kinds of places where young teachers can flourish, can bring to children the real opportunities that are based on our past but are developed into the future. Here are a series of questions then. Is for you learning passive and incremental, not dynamic and developmental? If you've given up, as some teachers have, it will become passive. Is learning acquired information? Do I need to read them? You can read them. If you want them later, do come to the Gratnell stand and we'll give you access to this. I actually have huge demand from people to say, please can we have that? So don't feel that you need necessarily to sit now and write it down. We'll make it accessible to you in all sorts of different ways, just as we make the information from learning rooms available immediately to you through computer technology. Teachers need to start to use and interact, don't they, in a particular way. Look at the last one, 8. Prior knowledge is unimportant to future learning. Do you go with that? You see, the good thing about putting down markers is it allows us to begin to determine where we are. In another classroom in the same school as somebody else who's an ARP warden. You see, they're hitting World War II for a whole term. In the 6th week of term, there was a fly past over school. How on earth did that happen? Or do you think that history is the dates of the kings of England? And you write them down and forget about them? Did you know the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides? I learnt that when I was about 9. I've never actually known what you do with it. There's a whole pile of information that we stuff into children that they don't actually know why they've got it. They don't know what to do with it. And at the end of the... It's a bit like one of the great explorers, isn't it? Christopher Columbus. When he set off, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he came back, he didn't know where he'd been. If education is like that for our children, what are we doing? Content segmentation. Think about it. Are you in a school, or are you part of an enterprise where children actually do one subject, followed by another subject, followed by another? Because somebody has... And remember that what's happening at the moment is the academies in this country are beginning to drive what happens in primary education. And what do they want? They want segmentation. They want children to do geography when they're 4. I found it very difficult to understand how geography can be divorced from history. How history can be divorced from... Do you feel like that sometimes? I actually see it all interwoven. Reliable evaluation can only be achieved through external and objective testing. Wow. Aren't we there with a vengeance? Aren't we there with a vengeance? Do you want more of it? Because unless you've got something to put in its place, you'll get more of it. You could even arrive at a point where you'll be told that every Thursday afternoon at 2:15 you have to do a particular kind of test on a particular kind of page. If you think, of course, that that is the way that individual people become learners in their own right. The primary conditions of awareness, thoughtfulness and sensitivity, which include mystery, uncertainty, disagreement and ambiguity, are thought to be soft options, lacking in rigour. I think that looking at the eyes of people in this room, there's a group of people here who know differently. What about climbing those steps then? Making that progress upwards? Is it something that you have to do according to the age you are? Or is it something that happens as a result of the kind of experiences you have before the next step, and before the next step and the one after that? Look at the statement there. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. Perhaps we need to advocate that more loudly and more clearly. So, we must replace the mechanistic paradigms and structures of schooling as we know them with a vision of a learning community that stimulates our inexhaustible capacity to learn. And remember, look at that last paragraph, the underpinning evidence as to whether that is right is out there in research, not done by teachers necessarily, by people who have spent years looking to see how the brain develops. It's a parallel processor. Learning engages the entire Look at that. It isn't something that's separate. This little girl is actually demonstrates, epitomizes, and is an image that you could take away. It is to do with curiosity. Or are you caught? No time for that. Takes time, takes organisation, takes management, takes somebody who understands the kind of questions that arise from that hands-on experience. Is absolutely essential to childhood in every single country of the world. We're here in Birmingham, but I can tell you that exactly the same thing can be said in Ontario, and it can be said in St. Lucia. And the response always is, when you put teachers together who have thought through what the program is that they really believe in, they will tell you that that is central. Learning involves focused attention, peripheral perception, and conscious and unconscious processes. Learning, look at that second to last line, is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. What do I mean by threat? You will learn those by tonight. Have you ever given a child a list of words to learn that they are totally unrelated to anything that they have anything to do with? You wouldn't do it, would you? You wouldn't expect to give children lists of words that are totally unrelated to experience and expect the brain to retain them. Because it doesn't. It doesn't. You forget the things that are not related to your experience, your internal clock. However hard you are required to go through the process, the brain drops them off the other end, unless they're important. And of course, each brain, we know, is unique. They're not all the same. They are very, very different. Here they are. I promised you that we'd return to Yellow Hat and his crew. Here they are in the Tempest. Yes, I can apologise for the pieces of curtaining that must have come from some box somewhere. But of course, these children created their own costumes, their own music, their own reconstruction of one of the great pieces of writing in English literature. We need to create learning and teaching communities that enable learners of all ages to direct their own learning towards greater coherence, complexity, rigour and accountability. Don't say it with apology. Skills learnt in isolation do not produce meaningful learning. Think about it. Have you ever done it? Will you go away from here and ever do it again? If I could wish one thing for all of you, it would be that you would actually raise the question in your own schools with colleagues who are doing that today out of fear rather than understanding. If we do not bring the curriculum to life in our schools now, it will suck the life out of the living. It has become moribund in many schools. I meet children who are learning historical facts that are totally unrelated to anything in their lives. Why? When on the doorstep of every single school and house in this country, it's dripping with history. And we could go through a curriculum example after example. The difference is, of course, that the origin of the word teach is show, not tell. Look it up. Are you a person who is interested in showing? Or are you someone who has got caught up because of the mechanistic process of time in teaching to the telling process? Here they are then. Here are the children beginning to put together part of their understanding, their knowledge, their skill. They're writers. The books they produce, contain their writing, their interpretation of the story. They make the books. The books then are part of the school library. Can you imagine coming into a school as a 5-year-old and seeing on the library shelves, and I can take you to numerous schools. When I say numerous, not numerous, but a lot, where in fact on the library shelves, with the school having given the child its own ISBN number, the books on the library shelves are written by the children. Think about that as a change from what the Chief Inspector of Schools is talking about today on radio and television about the dilemma of standards in reading in this country. Foster collaborative and dynamic approaches to learning to enable them to develop integrative ways of knowing and understanding, creating a learning culture, an excitement. I want to redirect it. I want these learning rooms to become places where when you go in, you're excited every day you go in, and as you come out, you long to be back the next day. They are not going to be identical. There isn't a blueprint we can put down and say they will all look like this, but we can help you to put in place the essential ingredients that make them work. We have an expertise in laying out rooms and schools in a way that is conducive to this kind of education. Personalisation and coherence then. Meaningful knowledge. Look at the wording. Cannot be broken down into separate parts. Internal and external connections are not bounded by physical, geographical, temporal space. All learning must be rich in information and experience, not one without the other. And how do I see you in relationship to it? Surely then, instead of being the people who tell, we're going to apprentice young people to you. It's a word that we've forgotten in the English language. Apprenticeship. To work alongside someone who has an expertise and an understanding and an insight into the things I need to know about. How exciting it could be. My grandchildren recently, at the beginning of term, decided that the day that school began was going to be so important that they got up at 4 o'clock. My daughter summoned me to go with her downstairs to go and see what was happening in the kitchen, where at 5:05 they were eating their breakfast. My question to them was, what on earth are you doing? Well, we're getting our breakfast because we're going to school, but it's only just after 5 o'clock. Yes, but the teachers will be waiting for us. What magic trick has that school performed? Why, after 2-3 weeks holiday, are those children desperate to get there for the next initiative? It's because the teachers actually understand that they are making arrangements that are going to catch children up in lifelong learning. And be certain that some of the things that have been pushed to one side, here painting, yesterday working with teachers and classroom assistants who are working with the very youngest children, talking about the absence of materials that are of intrinsic wealth, clay. Do you know, we've actually allowed education in this country to say you don't need clay anymore, you can have pretend clay. Clay that you can't fire, that has plastic in it. But we're still going to call it clay, but we're not going to do the proper things with it. How could you possibly understand what the Egyptians did 10,000 years ago with river mud if you're actually going to be given something which is a substitute for the real thing? What sort of paint would you imagine at the moment is the most popular paint purchased by English primary education? What colour? Let me tell you that we don't actually believe anymore in mixing paint, even though David Hockney is doing fairly well at the Royal Academy at the moment in terms of huge numbers of people going to see painting of a landscape in the best English tradition. Oh no, not as far as we're concerned. The paint, if you go out and talk to the paint suppliers here, the paint that is purchased, the colour that is purchased more than any other colour is purple. Ready mixed. What on earth are we doing? I want to go into classrooms where children have got 2 reds, 2 yellows, 2 blues and white. And they know that if they mix those 2 blues or those 2 reds or those 2 yellows at the opposite end of the colour spectrum, they will, like she can. Could she be the David Hockney 50 years from now, and many others like her? For years we've been trying to fix the parts, thinking that with enough design and measurement we'd get it right. We've tried to fix the curriculum, fix the children, fix the schools, fix the tests. No more. No more. We need, in the watershed that now exists, we need to go back to the principles of primary education as we know them, and work with children off the backdoor experiences of our classrooms and move out to the wider world and make those learning rooms environments that are unique. Look at this, the minutiae. We must fundamentally transform our learning environment so that we can develop the fullness of human capacity. We can't sustain something until our life becomes a source of sustainability. That child working with that pen is present in every single classroom of this country. And the insect that would inspire it is there as well. The question is, have we the courage to understand what that stands for, and in our learning rooms to make the arrangements for the child to have immediate access to those tools and equipment at the point when they need it, and to return those tools ready for the next person to use. Here they are. Guess what? They are making connections. You cannot do that off a worksheet. You can't do that because the teacher tells you. Here is successful intelligence. This teacher who set up this for these young children knew everything about childhood and the exploration of it, and that the theory of learning is derivative from that source. Practical intelligence. Therefore, we must foster intellectual meaning and understanding. Consider what it is about a museum that captures a child's fantasy. What is it about the apprenticeship relationship? I'm moving quickly because these principles facilitate situated and authentically contextualized learning. Schools as museums. I'm going over it. I think we got caught up, didn't we? Didn't the literacy hour tell us we had to have a plenary session? So here you go. Schools as museums, teachers as master craftsmen, children as apprentices, learning as experts. Wow. Take-off time. And there, in a courtyard, in an English school, she sits practicing a recorder, not because somebody told her she had to. She actually will tell you she's going to be a musician. Schools can no longer remain the way we remember them. Our learning, our humanity, and ultimately our sustainability depends on it. Thus, The task is not so much to see what no one yet has seen, but to think what nobody yet has thought about that which everybody sees. And for those of you who are here at the beginning, you'll know. I hope you take that image away and take it back to schools with a sense of importance and belief, because my goodness, we now need young people and the people who are here today to go back into school and take some initiatives, particularly now that the watershed created by the political structure of this country is as it is. Thank you very much.